The inflation genie is certainly, it's been shot back out of the bottle again. Let's bring in the Shadow Finance Minister James Paterson. James, good to see you this morning. So how are you reflecting on all of that this AM?
Good morning, Pete. Well, frankly, I thought that this Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, looked more like the Iraqi information minister yesterday when he said inflation was flat. It was like he was trying to argue Baghdad hasn't fallen, we still control the airport. Nothing to see here, when the reverse is the case. Inflation is now out of control again. It's firmly above the Reserve Bank's target band, both in underlying terms and the headline rate. Yep. And that is a direct result of government policy, and you don't need to take my word for it anymore. Penelope Smith, a senior official at the RBA, gave a really important speech yesterday where she said one of the factors that meant that the neutral rate, the cash rate, had to be higher than normal was growing fiscal deficits. And Jonathan Kearns, who's now the chief economist at Challenger Bank, but is also a senior former RBA official, attributed loose fiscal policy and fiscal stimulus to higher interest rates. So there is a direct relationship between Labor's inability to control the budget and higher inflation and higher interest rates hurting Australians.
So let's get your reaction to what the government has said about it, because I questioned the Treasurer about this yesterday, and they put the ball firmly in the court of state energy rebates being withdrawn, and also denied any accusations that it was because of excessive government spending.
Yes, well, of course they would, Pete, but the truth is that there are a range of factors contributing to higher inflation, not just energy rebates being withdrawn. Of course, a 37% increase in electricity prices over a year is a stunning failure of their energy policy. If you have to rely on subsidies to keep that under control, there's something fundamentally wrong with the underlying settings, as Ken Henry and others have argued. But that wasn't the only thing that was up over the last month. Many other categories of spending showed higher inflation as well. It's very clear that inflation is rising again on Labor's watch.
Well, it's housing as well too. I mean, and when we're talking about subsidies, James, it's proof, is it not, that rebates only mask a problem and then leads to bigger problems?
I think that's self-evident, Pete. It was always the case that Labor was just trying to mask their energy policy failure. Frankly, what they were really doing politically was compensating for their failure to deliver on their promise to reduce energy prices by $275. It's not an accident that the first rate of energy subsidies that they chose was $300, so they could say that they delivered their promise. But of course, you're not delivering your promise to lower energy prices if you're just masking higher energy prices with taxpayers' money. Really what you're doing is taking it from them in the one hand and giving back to them on the other. Taxpayers are actually still worse off.
Okay, so will you be the first member of the coalition then to demand the Treasurer axe those federal handouts beyond the end of the year?
Pete, points for effort. You've tried a couple of times on this program over a couple of weeks.
Well, I feel like it's a reasonable... Sure. I realise, you kind of don't want to get ahead of the Treasurer on this one, but when you say, subsidies, were you pointing to subsidies as being a failure, then how can you keep them going?
Well, what I'm pointing to a failure is the energy policy under this government's watch. Their mindless pursuit of net zero and unachievable 2030 and 2035 targets are driving up the cost of energy, and Australians are paying the price for that. And they're trying to mask those failures for a while. But as even Jim Chalmers has admitted, this can't be a permanent feature of the budget. It's not sustainable to pay people's power bills in perpetuity. So whether Jim Chalmers withdraws these subsidies this year, or in 6 months' time, or in 12 months' time, at some point he's going to have to turn the tap off, because a $42 billion forecast budget deficit this year means that even Labor has to take budget management more seriously and be concerned about debt and deficit. And so it will come off at some point. That's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, look, but this has already cost. I mean, these handouts, and I'm no doubt they're helpful, but it's costing the budget multiple billions of dollars. I mean, can the country really afford to keep them going?
Well, Jim Chalmers himself has said that we can't afford to keep them going in perpetuity forever. They may extend them for a short period of time. That would be my bet, that Labor will extend it, because
and would you
they
support
don't actually want Australians to confront the reality. Well, we'll come to that. We'll make our position clear once the government makes their position clear. They're going to be in power at least for the next 2.5 years. And they have to take responsibility for the decisions they've made. They put these subsidies in the first place. They're also responsible for rising energy prices.
I get a feeling that there's a policy call around the corner on this, but do you think there now needs to be a greater rush on gas reserves, something other than Band-Aid fixes?
Well, we did take a policy to the last election, as you know, Pete, to make sure that Australians' gas was available to Australians first. It's a crazy thing that one of the world's largest exporters of gas, Australia, has some of the highest domestic gas prices, and clearly there are flaws in the way the market is operating. But it's also equally important to preserve what is an incredibly important export industry for Australia and something which underpins our bilateral relationships with very important partners, especially in the region, like Japan and Korea. So Labor is catching up to us in some respects by saying they are looking at an East Coast domestic gas reservation policy. We'll wait and see what they bring forward and we'll respond to it then.
Just elsewhere this morning, James, looks like cuts are coming for the public service. The Treasurer called them reprioritisations, though, not cuts yesterday when I asked him about it. But this is an area where it cost you at the last election, potential cuts to the public service. So do you support cuts being made now at departments which are, quote, lower performing?
I thought it was very cute for Jim Chalmers to say that when they do cuts, they're called reprioritisations, but when the opposition does reprioritisations, they're called cuts. I mean, it's pretty disingenuous, particularly because Labor ran at the last election saying there'd be no cuts to the public service. Very clearly, there are going to be cuts to the public service. As the PBO called out in their post-election review, they said that Labor's budget implies a reduction in 22,500 public servants. Let's see what actually comes to pass. But the bare minimum the Australian public is entitled to from this government is some transparency. It's been reported in the Financial Review that they wrote to government departments and agencies to tell them to find their savings. That correspondence should be released, and David Pocock and I put a motion through the Senate yesterday to ask them to do so.
So would you get behind your old policy again and say cuts are needed? Because, I mean, it's been bloated by 40,000 since Labor's been in power.
We've acknowledged the limitations of the policy that we took to the election, Pete, and we're not continuing to prosecute that policy. And it is now up to Labor to demonstrate how they can make the budget add up without making any cuts to the public service, which is what they promised before the last election.
All right, we'll see where that ends up. Just a final one here, James. Just on the environmental reforms, it looks as though, leader-to-leader talks are taking place involving Anthony Albanese, Larissa Waters and Susan Lee as well. Can you shed any light on where that's at this morning from the coalition point of view?
Only, Pete, that we've said all along that we're willing to be constructive and bipartisan and act in the national interest if the government is willing to respond to the very serious policy reservations that we and the business community have raised about this government's legislation. As the draft legislation stands, we could not support it. We would have to vote against it because it would take us backwards in terms of approvals and allowing projects to proceed, not forward. So unless there's big change from the government, we'll find it very difficult to support.
All right, the coalition's out. Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens joining us next hour. We'll see where they're at on that this morning. So a bit for us to talk about this morning, James. Appreciate it as always.